I've been living alone in my Clearwater apartment for 2 years now, and I thought I understood how to stay safe in this world. What happened on November 3, 2023, during one of the worst storms Texas had seen all year, taught me why helping strangers can be absolutely deadly, and why trusting your instincts might be the only thing standing between you and becoming another victim. The pounding started at exactly 11:23 p.m., according to my bedside clock. These weren't polite knocks from a neighbor needing sugar. These were heavy, desperate pounds that made my entire door shake in its frame and echoed through my small apartment like gunshots. Rain hammered against my windows with incredible force, one of those late autumn Texas storms that floods entire streets within minutes and knocks out power lines across neighborhoods for days. Through the peephole, I could see her clearly, a woman who appeared to be in her early 30s, completely soaked from head to toe, shivering so violently I could see her entire body trembling. Her blonde hair was plastered against her face and neck, black mascara streaking down both cheeks in dark rivulets that mixed with the rainwater. She wore a torn blue denim jacket over what looked like a white blouse, and dark jeans that were soaked through. No umbrella, no raincoat, nothing to protect her from the torrential downpour that had been going for over 3 hours. "Please, please help me," she called through the door, her voice barely audible over the sound of the storm battering my building. "My car completely died on Oak Street about 6 blocks from here. My phone is completely dead too, the battery gave out hours ago. I just need somewhere warm to stay until morning, then I can call someone to help me." Every single instinct in my body told me to keep that door locked tight, and maybe call the police to check on her instead. But looking at her through that peephole, she appeared genuinely terrified and desperate, and I knew the nearest open business was at least 4 miles away in weather conditions that were borderline dangerous to drive in. What kind of person could look at another human being suffering like that, and just leave them outside in conditions that could literally kill them? Against my better judgment, I unlocked both the deadbolt and the chain lock, then opened the door. "Oh my God, thank you so much!" she gasped desperately as she stepped inside, immediately dripping water all over my hardwood entryway floor. "I'm Jennifer. Jennifer Miller. You're literally saving my life right now. I was starting to think I might actually die out there." Water pooled around her feet and spread across my entire entryway within seconds, creating puddles that reflected the overhead light. But up close, under the bright illumination of my apartment, I began noticing specific details that should have immediately alarmed me. Her clothes weren't just wet from the rain, they had what appeared to be deliberate tears in strategic places, as if she'd been running through dense brush or struggling physically with someone. Fresh scratches covered both of her arms from wrist to elbow, far too uniform and parallel to each other to be accidental injuries from stumbling or falling. "I'm Robert," I said, grabbing every towel I could find from my bathroom linen closet. "Here, wrap yourself in these and sit down on the couch. Let me make some hot coffee to warm you up." While my coffee maker gurgled and brewed in the kitchen, Jennifer sat on my leather couch, wrapped tightly in my largest blanket. But instead of relaxing in the warmth and safety of my apartment, she kept nervously checking both windows every few seconds, her entire body remaining rigid and tense despite being out of the storm. When I tried asking specific questions about her car's situation and what exactly had happened, her story kept shifting and changing. First she claimed it was overheating, then she said the battery had died completely, then she mentioned sudden transmission failure that had left her completely stranded. "Where exactly did your car break down?" I asked directly, handing her a large mug of steaming black coffee. "Oak Street," she answered quickly, almost too quickly, like she'd rehearsed the response. "Right near the intersection with Pine Road. Do you know that area at all?" I knew that specific area extremely well, since I drove through it every single day on my way to and from work. It was a well-maintained residential neighborhood with dozens of occupied houses, excellent street lighting throughout, and generally good visibility even in bad weather. It seemed like an extremely strange place for someone to be stranded for hours without a single person offering assistance, especially on a weeknight when most residents would be home from work and likely to notice someone in distress. At 12:45 a.m., feeling exhausted and wanting to get some sleep before work the next morning, I offered her my couch for the night and headed to my bedroom. This was my first critical mistake. I didn't think to lock my bedroom door behind me. I woke up suddenly at 2:31 a.m. to distinct sounds coming from my kitchen area. The sounds were methodical and deliberate, not random. Drawers being opened systematically, cabinets being searched through carefully. Jennifer was going through my entire apartment with professional efficiency, filling a large black backpack I'd never seen before with my laptop computer, my tablet, cash from my wallet on the counter, prescription medication bottles, and anything else that was valuable and easily portable. My blood turned to absolute ice. Moving as quietly as possible, I reached slowly for my cell phone on the nightstand, but one of my floorboards creaked loudly under my shifting weight. "Don't even think about moving another inch, Robert." Her voice was completely different now, cold as winter, professional, entirely controlled and threatening. "And forget about that phone right now." She appeared in my bedroom doorway like something from a nightmare, holding my own kitchen knife, the 10-inch chef's blade I'd used to prepare dinner just hours earlier. The helpless, desperate victim act had vanished completely. This was the real Jennifer Miller, and she was absolutely terrifying. "Here's exactly how this is going to work," she said, stepping slowly and deliberately closer to my bed. "You're going to stay perfectly quiet and motionless while I finish collecting what I came for. Then I'm going to restrain you securely, and by sunrise I'll be long gone from here. Cooperate fully with me and nobody has to get hurt tonight." My mind began racing frantically as the full reality of the situation hit me. Those scratches covering her arms weren't from running through brush. They were defensive wounds from someone who had fought back against her recently. The strategically torn clothes, the perfectly rehearsed story about car trouble, the way she'd systematically surveyed my entire apartment, while pretending to warm up. This wasn't random opportunistic theft. This was clearly her proven, practiced method. "How many other people have there been?" I asked, trying desperately to keep my voice completely steady and non-threatening. She smiled then, and it was absolutely the most chilling, predatory expression I had ever seen on another human being's face. "You really want to know the complete truth? The elderly man living alone on Maple Avenue just last week was so incredibly trusting and helpful. The college student in Pinehurst the week before that practically begged me to come inside his apartment. She was openly bragging about multiple previous victims, all apparently chosen specifically for their willingness to help what appeared to be a stranded woman in genuine distress. All probably discovered days later by worried family members or friends, if they were ever found at all. The broken-down car story works absolutely every single time without fail," she continued, clearly enjoying herself immensely and savoring the moment. "People see what appears to be a helpless woman in distress and all critical thinking just disappears completely. Especially men exactly like you, living alone, no visible security system, no weapons in obvious sight. I've been carefully watching this entire apartment complex for 3 full weeks, learning your schedule." That's when I realized my second critical mistake. Opening my door to let her in had also automatically disengaged my security chain, the only real protection mechanism I had. She had effectively compromised my ability to properly secure my apartment from the inside. But Jennifer had made one crucial error in her overconfidence. She had gotten too comfortable, spending time talking and gloating instead of acting quickly and efficiently. And tonight she had chosen the wrong target. I kept a heavy steel crowbar under my bed, left over from home renovation projects I'd completed last summer. As she moved closer with the knife raised and ready, I rolled hard to my left and grabbed it firmly with both hands. "Drop that knife right now, Jennifer. Or whoever the hell you really are." Genuine shock and surprise flashed across her face for the first time since dropping her act. She clearly wasn't accustomed to encountering any kind of resistance from her carefully chosen victims. Her previous targets had probably been too frightened or trusting to fight back effectively against her. She lunged forward aggressively with the blade aimed directly at my chest. I swung the crowbar defensively with all my strength, metal ringing loudly against steel as I managed to deflect her vicious strike. She was much quicker and more coordinated than I had expected, already repositioning herself strategically for another calculated attack. I managed to knock the knife completely out of her grip, but she was far from finished fighting. She immediately grabbed my heavy ceramic bedside lamp and hurled it directly at my head with surprising force and accuracy. I ducked just in time, the lamp exploding against the wall directly behind me and sending sharp fragments flying everywhere. "You have absolutely no idea what you've just started here," she snarled viciously, backing slowly toward my bedroom door while looking for another weapon. But I knew exactly what this was about. She was a practiced, experienced predator who had carefully perfected her technique on vulnerable targets over months or possibly years. She had done this many times before and would absolutely continue doing it if she managed to escape tonight. And I was probably physically stronger and more desperate to survive than any of her previous victims had been. I cornered her in my living room, holding the crowbar raised threateningly above my head. "Sit down on that couch right now. We're calling the police immediately." For the first time since dropping her helpless victim act completely, she looked genuinely afraid of me. "Listen carefully, there are other people involved in this operation. People who actively track my movements and know exactly where I am. If I don't check in with them by morning, then they can come visit you in county lockup." I dialed 911 while keeping the crowbar trained directly on her at all times. The emergency dispatcher seemed initially skeptical when I explained the situation. A home invasion by a woman who had been seeking help sounded highly unusual to her, but the obvious urgency and fear in my voice convinced her to send patrol units to my address immediately. Sergeant Michael Williams arrived in exactly 6 minutes, followed closely by Officer Lisa Johnson in a second patrol car. Jennifer had gone completely silent during the wait, sitting motionless on my couch with both hands clearly visible and placed on her knees. But the very moment both officers entered my apartment, she immediately and seamlessly switched back to her practiced victim persona. "Thank God you're both here," she began sobbing convincingly to the officers, tears streaming down her face. "This man attacked me with that crowbar for absolutely no reason. I just needed help because of my car, and he went completely insane." I could see doubt and suspicion forming in Sergeant Williams' eyes as he assessed the scene. Here was a small woman crying hysterically versus a larger man holding what could be considered a weapon. The optics were absolutely terrible for me in this situation. But then Officer Johnson's train I noticed several crucial details. The backpack filled with my personal belongings sitting on my kitchen counter, the kitchen knife lying on my bedroom floor, and how methodically and thoroughly my entire apartment had been searched through and ransacked. "Ma'am, can you please explain to me why your backpack contains this gentleman's laptop computer and prescription medications?" Jennifer's carefully constructed story began collapsing completely under even basic questioning from the officers. When they ran her real name through their computer system, Jennifer Santos, not Miller as she had claimed, they discovered outstanding warrants in 4 different counties for nearly identical crimes using the exact same method. The stranded woman needing help routine had apparently worked successfully for her at least 12 documented times over the past 18 months. The fresh scratches covering her arms? They were from her previous victim just 3 nights earlier, a retired man living alone in Modesto who had managed to fight back against her and escape to his neighbor's house for help. She had been actively fleeing from that crime scene when she had targeted my apartment complex. As they placed handcuffs on her wrists and read her rights, she turned and stared directly at me with pure, undiluted hatred burning in her eyes. "You should have just let me take your stuff and leave quietly, Robert. Now you're part of something much bigger and more dangerous than you could possibly understand." The comprehensive investigation that followed over the next several weeks revealed the complete scope of Jennifer's sophisticated criminal operation. She definitely wasn't working alone. There was an organized network of at least 6 people involved in identifying potential targets, providing detailed surveillance of their daily routines, and helping dispose of stolen evidence afterward. My entire apartment building had been under systematic observation for weeks before she made her move. They knew my work schedule, my daily habits, my routines, and most importantly, that I lived completely alone with no regular visitors. Detective Thomas Brown from the Robbery Division told me during my follow-up interview that I was extremely fortunate to be alive. Most of her confirmed victims were discovered days later by family members, restrained with zip ties and left to die slowly after she had completely emptied their homes of anything valuable. Your decision to fight back probably saved your life. The physical evidence collected from her backpack painted an even more disturbing and chilling picture of her true intentions. Jennifer had been carrying professional-grade zip ties, heavy-duty duct tape, and a small bottle of chloroform, tools specifically designed for the long-term restraint and incapacitation of victims. That kitchen knife wasn't just meant for intimidation purposes. She had been fully prepared to kill me if it became necessary to complete her crime. What continues to haunt me most about the entire experience is how easily I could have become just another nameless statistic. One single moment of misplaced compassion and human decency, one well-intentioned decision to help what appeared to be a stranger in genuine distress, and I nearly lost not just my possessions but my life. The trial that took place 4 months later revealed that Jennifer and her criminal network had systematically perfected their operation over several years. They specifically and deliberately targeted isolated individuals, particularly those who showed obvious signs of empathy, loneliness, or willingness to help others. The Stranded in a Storm story was just one of several carefully crafted scripts they had developed, all designed to exploit basic human decency and compassion for maximum effectiveness. Jennifer Santos was ultimately sentenced to 18 years in state prison for multiple counts of armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy charges related to the broader criminal network. But during her sentencing hearing, as the judge read her punishment, she turned in her chair, looked directly at me sitting in the gallery, and clearly mouthed the words, "This isn't over." Exactly 2 weeks after her conviction became final, someone attempted to break into my apartment again during the night. This time, I was completely ready and waiting for them. Have you ever had a complete stranger knock on your door late at night asking for help? What did you do, and do you think you made the right choice? I've been driving long-haul trucks for 8 years now, covering routes from California to Florida and everywhere in between. What happened on Interstate 40 outside Flagstaff on December 18, 2023, made me realize why some people are stranded on highways for very good reasons, and why my gut instincts about danger should never be ignored. It was exactly 2:47 a.m. according to my dashboard clock when I first spotted her in the bright glare of my headlights. A woman standing beside what appeared to be a broken-down silver 2019 Honda Civic, waving frantically at every vehicle that passed by on the highway. Heavy snow had been falling steadily for over 3 hours, turning the normally safe Arizona highway into a treacherous, slick mess that had already caused at least 3 serious accidents I'd passed during my drive. I pulled my red 2022 Peterbilt 579 over to the shoulder about 50 yards ahead of her position, engaging my hazard lights and air brakes. Through my large side mirrors, I watched her hurry toward my cab as quickly as she could manage, stumbling slightly in the accumulating snow. She appeared to be somewhere in her late 20s, wearing nothing but a thin black hoodie that was completely inadequate for the freezing weather conditions. Her dark brown hair was disheveled and partially covering her face, and even in the dim highway lighting, I could clearly see that she was shivering violently from the cold. "Thank God someone finally stopped," she called out breathlessly as I rolled down my driver's side window to speak with her. "I'm Amy. Amy Davis. My car completely died about an hour ago, and my cell phone has absolutely no signal way out here in the middle of nowhere. My name is Marcus Johnson, and over my 8 years of professional truck driving, I've helped dozens of stranded motorists in situations just like this one. It's simply what truck drivers do for each other and for regular people. We look out for folks in trouble on the road. But something about this particular situation immediately felt wrong to me. Her car looked relatively new and well-maintained, and I could see that the hazard lights were still blinking steadily, which suggested that the electrical system was functioning perfectly fine. More concerning to me was the fact that she had absolutely no winter clothing or emergency supplies despite traveling through dangerous mountain passes during December. "Where exactly were you headed tonight?" I asked, studying her facial expression and body language more carefully. "Phoenix," she answered quickly, almost too quickly. "To visit my sister for the holidays." Look, I know this is asking a lot from a complete stranger, but could you possibly give me a ride to the next truck stop? I can call AAA from there and get this sorted out. The nearest truck stop with full services was about 30 miles ahead in Winslow, Arizona. Against my better professional judgment, company policy strictly prohibits picking up hitchhikers in commercial vehicles due to liability and safety concerns. I reached over and unlocked the passenger door. Climb on up then. But I'm going to need to see some identification first, just for safety purposes. She hesitated for just a brief moment, and I caught a flash of something that might have been annoyance or calculation across her face, before pulling out what appeared to be a legitimate driver's license. Amy Louise Davis, with a Phoenix address that seemed reasonable enough. She climbed up into my cab with some difficulty, immediately bringing with her the strong smell of cigarettes mixed with something else I couldn't quite identify, something chemical and unpleasant. As we pulled back onto I-40 eastbound, merging carefully into the light late-night traffic, I noticed that she kept glancing at my CB radio system and GPS navigation unit, almost like she was trying to memorize my exact route or study my equipment. When I attempted to make friendly conversation by asking about her family's situation in Phoenix, her answers were consistently vague and often contradictory. First she mentioned visiting a sister, then she said something about a cousin, then she went back to talking about a sister who was supposedly expecting her arrival. "Do you drive this particular route very often?" she asked, which struck me as a rather odd question for someone who supposedly just needed emergency transportation. "Few times a month, depending on cargo assignments," I replied cautiously, not wanting to provide too much specific information about my schedule or routes to a complete stranger. About 10 miles further down the highway, she began asking increasingly specific and personal questions about my work. What company I drove for, how long I'd been employed with them, whether I typically drove solo or with a partner, what kind of cargo I usually hauled. Some of these questions might pass for normal small talk under different circumstances, but combined with her earlier suspicious behavior, the whole conversation felt more like a systematic interrogation than casual conversation. That's when I noticed the real problem developing behind us. In my large side mirror, I could clearly see another vehicle that had been following us at exactly the same distance for the past several miles. It was a dark blue 2020 Ford F-150 pickup truck, staying close enough to be intentionally tailing us but maintaining just enough distance to avoid drawing obvious attention from other drivers. "Amy, are you absolutely certain you don't know anyone who might be following us right now?" She turned quickly to look back through the rear window, and I saw something unmistakable flash across her face, not surprise or confusion, but immediate recognition, followed almost instantly by what looked like genuine fear or panic. "No, of course not. Why would anyone be following us?" But her voice had changed dramatically, becoming much higher pitched and noticeably more nervous than before. I grabbed my CB radio microphone and keyed it immediately. "Breaker 19, this is Bulldog eastbound on I-40 approaching mile marker 201. I've got a dark blue pickup truck that's been tailing me consistently for about 10 miles now. Anyone else out there seeing this situation?" A clear voice crackled back through the speaker almost immediately. "Bulldog, this is Roadrunner running about 2 miles behind your position. I can see that pickup truck you're talking about. It's been following you steadily ever since you picked up that hitchhiker." Amy's face went completely pale, and all the blood seemed to drain from her cheeks. "You need to let me out of this truck right now. Immediately. In the middle of absolutely nowhere? During a snowstorm? I don't think that's happening." That's when she reached into the front pocket of her hoodie and pulled out a small black revolver, pointing it directly at me. My blood turned to absolute ice as the full reality of the situation hit me. I'd been completely set up by professionals. "Pull over at the very next exit," she said, and her voice was now entirely different, cold, controlled, and completely threatening. "And don't even think about trying anything stupid with that CB radio." My mind began racing frantically as I realized what was happening. This wasn't a random stranded motorist needing help. This was obviously a carefully coordinated criminal operation. The broken-down car had probably been stolen or deliberately disabled as part of their plan. The truck following us was definitely part of her crew. They'd been systematically targeting long-haul truckers, probably for cargo theft or possibly something even worse. "What exactly is in your trailer?" she demanded, pressing the gun closer to my ribs. "Just electronics," I lied instinctively. I was actually hauling high-end computer equipment worth over $300,000, bound for distribution centers in Arkansas. "We already know exactly what you're carrying, Marcus. Don't make this situation any harder than it absolutely has to be." They had done their homework thoroughly. Someone had provided them with my specific route information, my cargo manifest, and possibly even my detailed schedule. This wasn't opportunistic or random crime. This was organized, professional, and had been planned well in advance. The exit for Winona was coming up in less than 2 miles. If I took that exit as she was demanding, I'd be driving directly into whatever trap they had prepared. But if I refused to comply, she had a loaded weapon pointed at me in the confined space of my cab. I made my decision quickly. Instead of beginning to slow down for the approaching exit, I grabbed my CB microphone again. "Mayday, mayday! This is Bulldog eastbound on I-40. Hijacking in progress. Armed woman in my cab, blue F-150 following. Send help immediately." Amy lunged across the cab for the radio, and the gun discharged. The bullet shattered my passenger side window completely, letting in a sudden blast of freezing cold air and driving snow. I yanked the steering wheel hard to the right, throwing her completely off balance and causing her to lose her grip on the weapon. "You stupid son of a bitch!" she screamed furiously, scrambling to regain control of the gun. My massive truck veered dangerously toward the shoulder, with the fully loaded trailer beginning to fishtail on the increasingly icy pavement. In my mirrors, I could see the blue F-150 suddenly accelerating, trying to pull alongside us. But I had 40 tons of momentum behind me, and they had to be extremely careful not to cause a major accident that would bring far too much unwanted attention. I keyed the CB again desperately. "Officer needs assistance. I-40 eastbound mile marker 199. Shots have been fired in commercial vehicle." Repeat, shots fired. Amy was fighting desperately to get the gun pointed at me again, but the cab was bouncing violently as we hit the rumble strips along the shoulder. I managed to grab her wrist firmly with my right hand while trying to maintain some control of the steering wheel with my left. The F-150 successfully pulled alongside us, and through their windows I could see the driver gesturing frantically at Amy. There were definitely at least 2 people in that truck, possibly 3. This was absolutely a professional crew operation with multiple participants. That's when I saw the most beautiful sight of my entire life. Red and blue emergency lights flashing in my rearview mirror, getting closer rapidly. Arizona State Police had apparently been monitoring CB Channel 19 and were already patrolling the area due to multiple weather-related accidents. "Police are right behind us," I shouted at Amy. "Your friends are about to scatter and abandon you." Sure enough, the F-150 immediately dropped back and took the very next exit, disappearing into the storm. Amy looked back at the rapidly approaching patrol cars, and her entire demeanor changed completely. "Let me out of this truck right now. Let me out immediately, and I promise I won't hurt you. It's way too late for that option now." I gradually and carefully slowed my truck, pulling over safely onto the shoulder as 3 police cruisers completely surrounded us. Officer William Brown was the first to approach my cab, service weapon drawn and ready. "Driver, shut off your engine immediately and exit the vehicle slowly with your hands visible." "Officer, I'm the victim here. The woman in my passenger seat has a gun and tried to hijack my truck." What followed was extremely tense but ultimately professional. Amy had managed to drop the weapon and was now claiming that I had kidnapped her from the highway. For about 10 very long minutes, it actually looked like I might be the one ending up in handcuffs. But then they ran her identification through their computer system. Amy Davis did exist as a real person, but she was currently serving a prison sentence in Nevada for armed robbery. The woman sitting in my truck was actually Angela Martinez, wanted in 3 different states for multiple truck hijackings. The comprehensive investigation that followed revealed the complete scope of their sophisticated criminal operation. Angela's crew had been systematically targeting specific high-value cargo loads for over a year. They would infiltrate trucking companies or bribe employees to steal shipping manifests, then set up elaborate fake breakdown scenarios on routes they knew valuable shipments would be traveling. The broken-down Honda Civic had been stolen from a Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport parking lot 3 days earlier. The blue F-150 contained professional equipment for forcing trucks off highways, plus restraints, weapons, and other tools of their trade. They had successfully hijacked 6 different trucks in the past 8 months, always using Angela as the stranded motorist, because truck drivers were statistically more likely to stop and help a woman in distress. Detective James Wilson from the Arizona State Police told me during my follow-up interview that I was extremely fortunate to be alive. Their previous victims were typically found several days later, tied up and abandoned in remote desert locations. The crews would sell the cargo through black market contacts and abandon the trucks hundreds of miles away. Angela Martinez was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in state prison for armed robbery, kidnapping, and conspiracy charges. Her crew members who were eventually caught received similar lengthy sentences. But during the trial proceedings, evidence emerged that they had been receiving inside help from someone within my own trucking company. The betrayal ran much deeper than anyone had initially expected. Someone with direct access to our shipping manifests and driver schedules had been systematically feeding detailed information to Angela's criminal crew for many months. The company conducted an internal investigation and fired 3 employees, but we never definitively identified who the actual source of the leak had been. 6 months after the trial concluded, I was approached at a truck stop in Oklahoma by someone claiming to have detailed inside information about Angela's operation and other similar crews. They wanted to meet privately to share information that could help catch other criminals. Instead of meeting with them, I immediately called the police. Have you ever picked up a hitchhiker or stopped to help a stranded motorist on the highway? What factors made you decide to stop and help, or to keep driving past them? Lived in the same Brookside neighborhood for 5 years, and I thought I knew everyone on my street pretty well. What happened on January 22, 2024, when I was visiting my neighbor Thomas Williams, taught me that some secrets are better left undiscovered, and that curiosity can lead you into situations you're completely unprepared for. Thomas had been my neighbor for about 3 years, ever since he moved into the blue house directly across from mine on Cedar Lane. He was a quiet man in his early 40s, worked as a night security guard at some corporate building downtown, and kept mostly to himself. We'd developed a casual friendship over shared conversations about yard work and occasional borrowing of tools. He seemed like a perfectly normal, reliable neighbor, the kind of person you trust to water your plants while you're out of town. That Tuesday evening, Thomas had invited me over to help him set up a new entertainment system he'd purchased. It was around 7:30 p.m. when I knocked on his front door, carrying my toolkit as promised. He welcomed me in warmly, and we spent about an hour connecting cables and programming his new smart TV and sound system in his living room. "I'm starving," Thomas announced as we finished the installation. "Want to grab some Chinese food? There's a great place about 10 minutes away that delivers, but I'd rather pick it up fresh." I agreed that food sounded good, and Thomas grabbed his keys and jacket. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, gesturing toward his couch. "I'll be back in about 20 minutes with dinner." After he left, I settled into his comfortable leather recliner and looked around his living room more carefully than I ever had before. The room was meticulously clean and organized, almost obsessively so. Every book on his shelves was arranged by height, every magazine on his coffee table was perfectly aligned, and there wasn't a speck of dust anywhere visible. That's when I noticed the magazine lying slightly askew on the side table next to where I was sitting. It seemed out of place in Thomas's normally perfect arrangement, like someone had been reading it recently and hadn't put it back properly. The cover was facing down, so I couldn't see what publication it was. My curiosity got the better of me. I reached over and flipped the magazine to see the cover, expecting to find something mundane like Popular Mechanics or Sports Illustrated. Instead, I found myself staring at what appeared to be a professional surveillance magazine, something called Security Watch Monthly, with articles about advanced monitoring equipment and investigative techniques. That seemed reasonable enough, given that Thomas worked in security. But as I casually flipped through the pages, I began noticing that certain articles had been heavily highlighted and annotated with handwritten notes in the margins. Not just casual reading notes, but detailed, methodical observations that looked more like study materials. One article about residential surveillance techniques had been marked up extensively. Thomas had written notes about sight lines, optimal observation hours, and behavior pattern documentation. Another section about long-range photography equipment had detailed price comparisons and performance specifications written in his neat handwriting. I felt a growing unease but kept reading. There was an article about legal versus illegal surveillance methods, and Thomas had highlighted every mention of what constitutes reasonable privacy expectations and consent requirements. His margin notes included phrases like property line limitations and public space observations. The deeper I got into the magazine, the more disturbed I became. There was a section about creating detailed surveillance reports, and Thomas had made extensive notes about organizing photos, documenting timeframes, and maintaining subject files. This wasn't casual professional reading. This looked like active research for actual surveillance operations. Then I reached a page that made my blood run cold. It was an article about neighborhood watch programs, but Thomas's notes weren't about community safety. He'd written detailed observations about target identification, routine mapping, and vulnerability assessment. In the margin next to a paragraph about observing neighbors' daily patterns, he'd written what looked like specific times and dates. I recognized some of those dates. They corresponded to times when I'd been working in my yard, leaving for work, or having friends over. Thomas had been systematically documenting my activities, and apparently those of other neighbors as well. My hands started shaking as I continued reading his annotations. There were references to Subject A and Subject B, with detailed behavioral notes. Subject A leaves for work every weekday at 7:45 a.m., returns between 5:30 to 6 p.m. Saturday routine includes yard work 9 to 11 a.m. That was clearly describing me and my schedule. There were more disturbing details. Notes about when lights went on and off in various houses, when people took vacations, when they had visitors, even observations about personal relationships and family dynamics. Thomas had been conducting systematic surveillance of our entire neighborhood, treating us all like subjects in some kind of investigation. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come. Tucked between the pages toward the back of the magazine, I found several printed photographs. They were long-distance shots of neighbors in their yards, going to their cars, even some that appeared to be taken through windows of homes. The photo quality was excellent, clearly taken with professional equipment. One photo showed me working in my garden last weekend, completely unaware I was being photographed. Another showed my neighbor Sarah Johnson getting her mail in her bathrobe early one morning. There was even a photo of the elderly couple who lived 2 houses down, sitting on their porch in the evening. Each photo had a small adhesive label with dates, times, and brief notes about the subject's activities. This wasn't casual photography. This was systematic documentation of people's private lives without their knowledge or consent. I heard Thomas's car pulling into his driveway and quickly put the magazine back exactly as I'd found it, my heart pounding. When he came through the door carrying bags of Chinese food, I tried to act completely normal, but my mind was racing with questions and concerns. "Everything okay?" Thomas asked, apparently noticing something in my expression. "You look a little pale." "Just tired," I lied, helping him unpack the food in his kitchen. "Long day at work." As we ate dinner and made small talk, I found myself studying Thomas's face and mannerisms in a completely different way. Was this just a professional security guard with perhaps too much interest in his work, or was there something more sinister going on? The level of detail in his surveillance notes and the secret photography suggested this went far beyond normal neighborhood awareness. I tried to steer the conversation toward his work, hoping to understand his motivations better. How do you like the security job? Must be interesting work. It has its moments, he replied carefully. You learn a lot about human behavior, watching people when they don't know they're being observed. People reveal their true nature when they think no one is paying attention. The way he said this, combined with what I'd discovered, sent chills down my spine. After dinner, I made an excuse about having early meetings the next day and headed home, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd found. Over the next few days, I became hyper-aware of Thomas's presence. I noticed that he spent a lot of time on his front porch or working in his yard, always seeming to be positioned where he could observe multiple neighbors' houses. I realized that his bedroom window had a direct view into several neighbors' backyards, and I'd started noticing what looked like camera equipment on his windowsill. I debated whether to report this to police, but I wasn't sure if what he was doing was actually illegal. He was observing from his own property, and technically anything visible from public areas might not constitute a crime. But the systematic nature of his surveillance and the secret photography certainly felt like violations of privacy. A week later, I was talking to Sarah Johnson while getting my mail, and she mentioned something that confirmed my worst fears. Have you noticed anything strange about Thomas lately? I swear I've seen camera flashes coming from his house at night, always pointed toward different neighbors' homes. That evening, I decided to do some discreet investigation of my own. Using binoculars from my upstairs window, I observed Thomas's house after dark. Sure enough, I could see the faint glow of electronic equipment in his bedroom, and occasionally I caught glimpses of him with what appeared to be a telephoto lens pointed at various houses. The next morning, I called the Brookside Police Department and spoke with Detective Michelle Brown. I explained my concerns about potential illegal surveillance, though I didn't mention how I'd discovered the information. She took my report seriously and said they'd look into it. 2 days later, I watched from my window as police officers executed a search warrant at Thomas's house. What they found was far worse than I'd imagined. Thomas had converted his spare bedroom into a surveillance center with multiple monitors, high-end camera equipment, and filing cabinets full of detailed reports on dozens of neighbors. The investigation revealed that Thomas Williams wasn't actually employed as a security guard. He'd been unemployed for over a year and had been conducting elaborate surveillance operations on neighborhood residents, apparently for his own psychological gratification. Some of the surveillance appeared to be preparation for potential break-ins, as he documented when people were away and what security measures they had. Detective Brown told me later that they'd found evidence of Thomas having entered several neighbors' homes when they were away, though nothing appeared to have been stolen. He seemed to be more interested in observing and documenting people's private lives than in taking anything, she explained. It's a form of voyeurism combined with stalking behavior. Thomas was arrested on multiple charges including criminal trespass, stalking, invasion of privacy, and possession of surveillance equipment used in the commission of crimes. The search of his house revealed surveillance files on over 20 different neighbors, some going back more than 2 years. During the trial, it came out that Thomas had a history of similar behavior in his previous neighborhood, which was why he'd moved to our street. He'd developed an obsession with secretly observing and documenting other people's lives, treating real people like subjects in some twisted research project. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to have no contact with any of his former neighbors. But the damage to our neighborhood's sense of security was permanent. Everyone now wondered what private moments had been observed and documented, what secrets had been invaded. The most disturbing part was realizing how long this had been going on without anyone suspecting. Thomas had been living among us, appearing completely normal while systematically violating our privacy and safety. If I hadn't accidentally discovered that magazine, he might have continued indefinitely. 6 months after Thomas was sentenced, I received an anonymous letter at my home. It contained several photos of me that I'd never seen before, along with a note that simply said, "You should have minded your own business." Have you ever discovered something about a neighbor that made you question how well you really know the people living around you? I'd been hiking the trails around Pinehurst for 6 years, and I thought I knew these Pennsylvania woods better than most people. What happened on March 9, 2024, when I agreed to help a stranger search for his missing friend, taught me that some people who appear to need help are actually the ones you should be running from. It was around 3:15 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon when I encountered him on the main trail leading into Oakwood State Forest. I'd been hiking solo for about 2 hours, enjoying the early spring weather and the peace of the wilderness. The trail was moderately busy that day with other hikers, families, and mountain bikers taking advantage of the clear skies after several days of rain. He appeared suddenly from a side trail, looking genuinely distressed and out of breath. A man in his mid-30s, wearing a green flannel shirt, dark jeans, and hiking boots that looked relatively new. His brown hair was disheveled, and he had sweat stains on his shirt despite the cool temperature. "Excuse me," he called out as he approached me. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I really need help. I'm David Garcia, and my friend William got separated from our group about 2 hours ago. We've been searching everywhere, but these trails all look the same to me." I introduced myself as James Miller and asked for more details about the situation. David explained that he and 3 friends had driven up from Philadelphia for a day hike. They'd split up to cover more ground while looking for a good camping spot for a future trip, and William had gone off toward the northern section of the forest and never returned to their agreed meeting point. "We're not really experienced hikers," David admitted, wringing his hands nervously. "William has his cell phone, but there's no signal up here. I'm getting really worried because it's going to be dark in a few hours, and the temperature is supposed to drop tonight." This seemed like a reasonable concern. Early March nights in Pennsylvania can be dangerous if you're unprepared, and inexperienced hikers do get lost in these woods regularly. I'd helped with several search efforts over the years, and the local park rangers always appreciated assistance from people who knew the trail system well. "What does William look like?" I asked, mentally mapping out the best search strategy. "About 6 feet tall, brown hair, wearing a red jacket and black backpack. He's got a distinctive scar on his left cheek from a childhood accident, so he's pretty easy to identify." David pulled out a somewhat crumpled photo from his wallet showing himself with 3 other men at what appeared to be a restaurant or bar. He pointed to one of them, indeed a tall man with brown hair and a visible facial scar, wearing the red jacket he'd described. "The northern trails can be confusing if you don't know them well," I said, studying the photo. "I can help you search that area. I know those paths pretty thoroughly." David's relief was obvious and seemed genuine. "Thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. My other friends went back to get park rangers, but that could take hours." We headed north from the main trail onto a narrower path that led deeper into the forest. David stayed close behind me, occasionally calling out William's name and stopping to listen for responses. His behavior seemed appropriate for someone genuinely worried about a missing friend. About 20 minutes into our search, we reached a fork in the trail where the path split in 3 different directions. This was a common place for inexperienced hikers to get confused and take the wrong route. "Which way do you think he might have gone?" David asked, looking around uncertainly. I was about to suggest we split up to cover more ground when I noticed something that made me pause. David's hiking boots, which had looked relatively new when I first saw him, showed no signs of wear or dirt despite him claiming to have been searching for 2 hours in muddy conditions. My own boots were already caked with mud from the recent rain. "How long did you say you'd been searching?" I asked casually. "About 2 hours," he repeated, but I caught a slight hesitation in his voice. I decided to test him with a simple question about the trail system. "Did William maybe take the Blue Mark Trail toward Beaver Creek? That's a common mistake for new hikers." "Yeah, that's possible," David agreed quickly. But there was no Blue Mark Trail in this section of forest, and Beaver Creek was in an entirely different state park about 50 miles away. An experienced local hiker might make that mistake under stress, but someone who'd been searching these specific trails for 2 hours should have noticed the actual trail markers. I started paying closer attention to David's behavior and story. When I asked more specific questions about their hiking plans, his answers became increasingly vague and contradictory. First, he said they'd planned to camp overnight, then he mentioned they were doing a day hike. He couldn't remember what time they'd started hiking or where exactly they'd parked their car. "Let's try the Eastern Trail," I suggested, deliberately pointing toward a path that led deeper into the forest and away from the main hiking areas. As we walked, David kept glancing around nervously, but not in the way someone searches for a missing person. It was more like he was checking to make sure we weren't being followed or observed. When other hikers appeared in the distance, he would suggest we take different paths to cover more ground. After another 15 minutes, we were quite deep in the forest, well off the main trails that most hikers used. The trees were denser here, and the afternoon light was starting to fade. David suggested we sit down on a fallen log to plan our next move. "You know these woods really well," he said, watching me carefully. "Do you hike alone here often?" Something about the way he asked that question sent alarm bells ringing in my mind. It wasn't the kind of question someone focused on finding a missing friend would ask. It sounded more like he was gathering information about my hiking habits. "Sometimes," I answered cautiously. "What about your friend William? What kind of outdoor experience does he have?" David's answer was completely different from what he told me earlier. Now William was supposedly an experienced camper who knew how to survive in the woods, contradicting his earlier claim that they were all inexperienced hikers. That's when I noticed David reaching into his backpack while maintaining eye contact with me. The way he was moving was deliberate and careful, like he was trying to retrieve something without me noticing what it was. "You know what?" I said, standing up quickly. "I think we should head back toward the main trail and meet up with the park rangers. They'll have better equipment for this kind of search." "No," David said firmly, his entire demeanor changing instantly. "I think we should keep looking out here. William might be injured and unable to call for help." His hand was still in his backpack, and I could see the outline of something that definitely wasn't hiking equipment. My adrenaline spiked as I realized I might be in serious danger. "Actually, I just remembered I promised to meet someone back at the parking area," I said, trying to sound casual while slowly backing away from him. "I don't think so, James." David's voice was now completely different, cold and controlled. He pulled his hand out of his backpack, revealing a large hunting knife with a serrated blade. "You're going to stay right here and help me with something else." My blood turned to ice. There was no missing friend named William. This had been a setup from the beginning, designed to lure me deep into the woods where no one would find me or hear me scream for help. "What do you want?" I asked, continuing to back away slowly while scanning for escape routes. "Your wallet, your phone, your car keys," he said, standing up and moving toward me with the knife. "And then we're going to take a little walk to somewhere even more private." I had two options: run immediately or try to talk my way out of this. The nearest main trail was at least half a mile away through dense forest, and David looked like he was in good physical condition. But staying here with a knife-wielding stranger wasn't exactly appealing either. "Look, you can have my wallet and phone right now," I said, reaching slowly for my back pocket. "No need for anyone to get hurt." But as I reached for my wallet, I grabbed something else instead, a small canister of bear spray I always carried while hiking. In one quick motion, I pulled it out and discharged it directly into David's face. He screamed and stumbled backward, temporarily blinded and coughing violently. I didn't wait to see how quickly he'd recover. I turned and ran as fast as I could through the forest, crashing through undergrowth and jumping over fallen logs. Behind me, I could hear David shouting threats and promises of what he'd do when he caught me. The sound of branches breaking told me he was following, but the bear spray had given me a crucial head start. I ran for what felt like hours but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes, until I reached a trail I recognized. From there, I sprinted toward the main parking area, where I immediately called 911 on my cell phone. Pennsylvania State Police responded quickly, along with park rangers who knew the forest layout. I gave them a detailed description of David Garcia and the exact location where I'd encountered him. They organized a search team and began looking for him immediately. Officer Robert Johnson took my statement, while paramedics checked me for injuries. "You're extremely lucky," he told me. "We've had 3 unsolved disappearances in state forests in this region over the past 18 months. All were solo hikers who were never seen again." The search for David Garcia continued for 3 days, but they never found him. However, they did discover evidence that someone had been camping illegally in the deep forest areas for an extended period. They found a concealed campsite with multiple tents, survival supplies, and disturbingly, personal items that appeared to belong to different people: wallets, watches, hiking gear, even some clothing. Detective Angela Williams, who took over the investigation, showed me photos of some of the recovered items. I recognized the distinctive hiking backpack that had been featured in missing person flyers posted around local trailheads months earlier. "We believe David Garcia, or whoever he really is, has been using this method to target solo hikers for months or possibly years," Detective Williams explained. "He approaches people on trails with a story about needing help, then lures them into remote areas where he can rob and potentially kill them." DNA evidence from the campsite linked to at least 2 of the missing hikers, confirming that this was indeed a serial predator who had been hunting people in Pennsylvania state forests. The investigation revealed that David Garcia was actually Michael Santos, a convicted felon with a history of assault and robbery who had been wanted on parole violations for over a year. He'd been living off the grid in state forests, supporting himself by targeting hikers and campers. 3 weeks after my encounter, Santos was spotted by a park ranger in a different state forest about 60 miles away. When confronted, he fled deeper into the woods and was never captured. There's an active warrant for his arrest, and his photo is posted at trailheads throughout the region. But what haunts me most is realizing how close I came to becoming another missing person statistic. If I hadn't noticed the inconsistencies in his story, if I hadn't been carrying bear spray, if I hadn't been familiar enough with the forest to find my way back to safety, I might never have been found. 6 months later, I received a call from Detective Williams. A hiker in West Virginia had reported being approached by a man matching Santos's description, using the exact same story about a missing friend named William. Have you ever been approached by a stranger asking for help in an isolated area? What made you decide whether to help them or not? I've been babysitting for families in Ridgeway for 3 years now, and I thought I'd seen every type of household setup imaginable. What happened on February 14, 2024, when I agreed to watch the Johnson children at their home on Pine Road, taught me that some families have secrets that go far beyond normal privacy concerns, and that agreeing to help neighbors can put you in the middle of something truly disturbing and potentially dangerous. Michelle and Robert Johnson had moved into the large 2-story colonial house directly across the street from me about 8 months earlier. They seemed like the absolute perfect suburban family, 2 well-behaved young children, an impeccably maintained property with professional landscaping, and they always offered friendly waves when we passed each other getting mail or working in our yards. Michelle worked as a registered nurse at Ridgeway General Hospital, and Robert claimed to work in telecommunications consulting, which he said required extensive travel throughout the northeastern United States. When Michelle called me on that Wednesday afternoon asking if I could babysit their 2 children, Emma and Tyler, ages 6 and 8 respectively, I was happy to help out. They were offering unusually generous pay, $50 for what should have been a simple evening of watching movies and putting kids to bed, which was nearly double my normal rate. "We have a rare date night opportunity," Michelle explained over the phone, sounding genuinely excited. "Robert's business partner is in town for a conference, and we haven't been out together in months. We should be back by 11 p.m. at the absolute latest." I arrived at their house promptly at 6:30 p.m., and Michelle gave me all the standard babysitter instructions, emergency contact numbers, detailed bedtime routines for both children, where to find appropriate snacks and drinks, and comprehensive instructions for operating their sophisticated entertainment system. The children were remarkably well behaved and seemed genuinely excited about having a babysitter for the evening. Emma and Tyler both know they're absolutely not allowed in Daddy's office upstairs, Michelle mentioned casually as she gathered her designer purse and car keys. It's the room at the very end of the hallway, and it's always kept locked anyway, but I just wanted you to know the rule. This seemed like a completely reasonable boundary to me. Many parents have dedicated home offices they don't want children disturbing, especially if they contain important work documents, expensive computer equipment, or confidential client materials. After Michelle and Robert left for their dinner reservation, I spent the early evening playing various board games with the children, helping Emma with some basic math homework, and letting both kids watch an age-appropriate animated movie. They were absolutely delightful children, polite, engaging, and well-mannered, and the evening was proceeding smoothly without any problems. Around 8:30 p.m., as we were finishing the movie and getting ready for bedtime routines, Tyler accidentally knocked over his large cup of apple juice, spilling the entire contents across their expensive glass coffee table and onto their pristine hardwood floors. Some of the sticky liquid immediately ran under the leather couch, and I knew I needed to clean it up properly and thoroughly before it could stain their expensive-looking flooring. "Don't worry about it at all," Emma said quickly, almost too quickly. "Mommy keeps all the special cleaning supplies upstairs in the big linen closet next to the bathroom." I sent both children upstairs to brush their teeth and get into their pajamas while I went to find the appropriate cleaning supplies. The linen closet was located at the top of the stairs, and it was extremely well stocked with fluffy towels, various cleaning products, and other household maintenance items. I grabbed several paper towels and a bottle of specialized wood floor cleaner. As I was heading back downstairs with the cleaning supplies, I heard a strange, distinct sound coming from the end of the upstairs hallway, a series of faint electronic beeping noises, like the sound a computer makes when receiving email notifications or system alerts. I remembered Michelle mentioning that Robert's home office was always kept locked, but the sounds clearly suggested that sophisticated electronic equipment was currently running inside that room. My curiosity got the better of me, which I now realize was a terrible mistake. I walked quietly to the end of the hallway and found the door that was supposedly always securely locked. But when I carefully tested the handle, it turned easily in my hand. Either Robert had forgotten to lock it properly before leaving, or the locking mechanism wasn't working correctly. I opened the door slowly and immediately knew I had stumbled into something I absolutely wasn't supposed to see. The room wasn't a typical home office at all. Instead, it was filled with multiple large computer monitors, sophisticated camera equipment with telephoto lenses, professional recording devices, and what appeared to be an elaborate, expensive surveillance setup that belonged in a security company, not a suburban home. There were 6 large flat-screen monitors mounted professionally on the wall, each displaying different live camera feeds in crystal-clear high definition. But these definitely weren't security cameras monitoring the Johnson property for burglars. They were showing detailed views of the interiors of other houses throughout our neighborhood. I could see directly into the Millers' living room where they were watching television, the Williams' kitchen where Mrs. Williams was washing dishes, the elderly Garcias' bedroom 2 houses down where they were getting ready for bed, and several other neighbors' most private spaces. The camera feeds were obviously being actively recorded, based on the digital timestamps and red recording indicators visible on each individual screen. Some cameras appeared to be strategically positioned to capture the most intimate areas of neighbors' homes, bedrooms, bathrooms, private family spaces where people would never expect to be observed by anyone outside their own family. On the large desk position below the wall-mounted monitors were dozens of detailed files organized meticulously by street address and family name. Each file contained hundreds of printed photographs, typewritten observations about the residents' daily routines and habits, work schedules, personal relationships, family dynamics, and even shockingly intimate details about their most private lives and personal problems. I opened one thick file labeled 1247 Pine Road, the street address of my elderly neighbors, the Garcias, who had lived on our street for over 20 years. Inside were literally dozens of high-resolution photographs taken through their windows at various times of day and night, detailed typed notes about their medical conditions and prescription medications, their family visitors and social interactions, and even copies of their personal financial information that had somehow been illegally obtained. Another comprehensive file contained extensive information about the young couple who lived 3 houses down from me. The surveillance notes included disturbing details about their recent marriage problems, their individual work situations and career stress, and disturbingly intimate observations about their personal relationship and private conversations that could only have been gathered through extensive, long-term spying operations. I felt physically sick to my stomach as I began to realize the full scope of what I was looking at. The Johnsons had been systematically spying on our entire neighborhood for months, possibly years, documenting people's most private moments and personal information without their knowledge, consent, or legal authorization. But the most disturbing and personally terrifying discovery was yet to come. On one of the 6 monitors, I suddenly recognized my own house and property. There was a live camera feed showing the interior of my own living room in real time, and I could actually see my cat walking across my furniture. The Johnsons had somehow managed to place sophisticated surveillance equipment inside my own private home as well. As I stared in absolute horror at the screen showing my own private living space being actively monitored and recorded, I heard the distinct sound of a car pulling into the driveway outside. The Johnsons were returning from their dinner much earlier than their promised 11 p.m. arrival time. I quickly tried to close all the open files and turn off the monitors, desperately attempting to leave the room exactly as I'd found it. But in my panic and haste, I accidentally knocked over a small electronic device that had been sitting on the desk, and it clattered loudly to the hardwood floor. As I bent down to pick it up, I realized it was a small wireless camera with recording capabilities, probably intended for installation in yet another unsuspecting neighbor's home. I heard the front door opening downstairs and Michelle's cheerful voice calling out, "Sarah? How did everything go tonight with the kids?" I managed to get out of the surveillance room and close the door securely behind me, my heart pounding frantically as I tried to compose myself and act completely normal. I headed downstairs carrying the cleaning supplies, desperately hoping my face and body language didn't reveal the shocking discovery I'd just made. Everything went absolutely great, I told Michelle, trying my best to keep my voice steady and natural. Emma and Tyler were wonderful children. Tyler just had a small juice spill, so I was getting supplies to clean it up properly. "Oh, you really didn't need to bother with that," Michelle said with a smile, but I noticed her eyes glancing quickly toward the staircase, as if she was checking to see if I might have been anywhere upstairs that I shouldn't have been. Robert appeared from the kitchen and studied my face very carefully with an intensity that made me extremely uncomfortable. "You look a little pale, Sarah. Is everything okay? You seem upset about something." "Just tired," I lied as convincingly as I could manage. It was a really long day at work before coming over here to babysit. As I gathered my personal belongings to leave their house, I noticed that both Michelle and Robert were watching me with unusual intensity, as if they were trying to determine whether I had discovered something I shouldn't have seen. The entire atmosphere in the house had changed completely. What had been a friendly, comfortable environment just hours earlier now felt tense, threatening, and potentially dangerous. "We really appreciate you helping us out tonight on such short notice," Robert said as he walked me to the front door, maintaining uncomfortably direct eye contact. "We might need a regular babysitter if you're interested in ongoing work. You seem very trustworthy and discreet." The way he emphasized those particular words sent genuine chills down my spine. I mumbled something vague about needing to check my schedule and got out of their house as quickly as possible without appearing to be fleeing. Once I was safely back inside my own house with all the doors locked, I immediately began conducting a systematic search for hidden surveillance cameras. It took me over an hour of careful examination, but I finally found a tiny wireless camera cleverly hidden inside a decorative plant arrangement that had been delivered to my house several weeks earlier. A welcome to the neighborhood gift from the Johnsons that I had never thought twice about accepting. I called the Ridgeway Police Department first thing the next morning and spoke with Detective William Brown about my disturbing discovery. Initially, he seemed somewhat skeptical about my story, which I understood since it sounded almost too bizarre to be true. But when I described the specific surveillance equipment I'd seen and mentioned the detailed files containing neighbors' personal information, he agreed to open an official investigation. Getting a proper search warrant took 3 full days, during which I was absolutely terrified that the Johnsons would somehow realize I'd discovered their illegal surveillance operation and either destroy all the evidence or potentially retaliate against me for exposing them. I noticed significantly increased activity around their house, with unfamiliar people coming and going at unusual hours of the day and night. When police finally executed the comprehensive search warrant, what they discovered was even more extensive and disturbing than what I'd initially seen. The Johnsons had been operating a sophisticated neighborhood surveillance network for over 18 months, with professionally installed cameras secretly placed inside at least 12 different homes throughout our subdivision. The investigation revealed that they had been systematically selling the recorded footage to unknown buyers through encrypted online networks, apparently as part of an organized voyeuristic content distribution operation that generated substantial illegal income. The most disturbing aspect was that they had been specifically targeting families with young children, elderly residents living alone, and young couples, vulnerable populations whose privacy violations would be most valuable to certain types of criminal buyers. Further investigation revealed that Robert Johnson wasn't actually employed in legitimate telecommunications consulting as he had claimed. He was a convicted felon with extensive experience in illegal electronic surveillance who had been operating similar criminal schemes in at least 3 other states before relocating to Pennsylvania to avoid detection. Michelle's position as a registered nurse at the local hospital had provided them with unauthorized access to personal medical information about neighborhood residents, which they had been systematically using to identify the most vulnerable targets for their surveillance operations and privacy violations. Both Michelle and Robert Johnson were arrested on multiple serious charges including criminal invasion of privacy, illegal surveillance, child endangerment, conspiracy, and violation of federal wiretapping laws. The FBI became involved when investigators discovered evidence that the surveillance footage was being distributed across state lines through organized criminal networks. During the comprehensive investigation that followed, we learned that at least 15 different families in our immediate neighborhood had been victimized by their surveillance operations, some for over a full year. The emotional and psychological impact on our close-knit community was absolutely devastating. People felt personally violated and unsafe in their own homes, knowing that their most private and intimate moments had been secretly recorded and possibly distributed to strangers. The Johnson children, Emma and Tyler, were immediately placed with relatives in another state after it became clear that their parents had been using them as unwitting participants in their surveillance operation, having them report on neighbors' activities, routines, and personal information during seemingly innocent conversations. Michelle and Robert Johnson were ultimately sentenced to 8 years each in federal prison. But the permanent damage to our neighborhood's sense of security and community trust was irreparable. Several longtime families moved away entirely, unable to feel safe and comfortable after learning how extensively and systematically their privacy had been violated. What continues to haunt me most about this entire experience is realizing that if I hadn't accidentally discovered their operation that night, it might have continued indefinitely, with more families being victimized and their most private moments being recorded and sold to strangers. 6 months after the Johnsons were imprisoned, I received an unmarked package with no return address. Inside was a USB drive containing video footage of me in my own home, along with a typed note that simply said, "We have copies of everything, and we know where you live. Have you ever discovered that people you trusted were secretly violating your privacy in ways you never imagined possible? How did it change your relationship with your neighbors and your sense of security in your own community?" Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.